start the well, good morning. Hello. Today is August 11th, 2022, and welcome to Will Work for Food, the New Possibilities Hour. This morning, we're so pleased to have a special guest with us, our special guest for the day, and that is Michael Rust. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Winnebago Conflict Resolution Center, mediator, managing director of another resolution center, the Fond du Lac, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Conflict Resolution Center. And what he's going to talk about to us today is something I never really ever thought about, and that is lawyering in an emoji world. Communication is changing faster, shorter, and more on demand. This has reignited old problems and sparked new problems. Emojis have emerged as a cultural solution to some of these problems. So how can lawyers, mediators, and judges use and interpret emojis to be more effective, efficient, and accurate in communicating and analyzing communications? You know, like what does LOL mean? Maybe as a basic, right? So this promises to be fascinating, but before we get into that, let's go back to our basics, which is that, as you know, there is no charge for these programs. We're so happy to present them. They were started as the brainchild of Natalie Armstrong-Motin back in the spring of 2020 in response to the pandemic. And then Jeff Kachavin and I are honored to moderate these weekly. And Sari Agami has joined us about a year or so ago, I think it was, and she handles all the details. So the donations from the audience over those 2.5 years have been fantastic. Natalie, do you know what the number is now of donations of which we've been told?
I do, Jean. Thanks so much for the great introduction. Looking forward to Michael's program. I keep a list here of all the donations that people let me know about. So at the very bottom of my chicken scratched edition here is that we have raised, Will Work for Food and all of its speakers have raised for food banks worldwide $305,583.20. Thank you all so much for your amazing generosity.
Wow, is about all I can say. You know, when it started out, to think of more than $250,000 and more than 3 million meals served, thanks to the generosity of speakers, participants, just the whole global legal community supporting Will Work for Food. That's just amazing. So as always, if there's some sort of donation you can make, whether it's to the preferred food bank of the speaker or to your preferred local food bank, and then let Natalie know about it, that's fantastic. And if there's not one, then don't worry about that. Just enjoy and learn. Feed your mind while you're feeding the world, essentially, as I say. So with that said, Michael, why don't we turn it over to you? You can tell us what your food bank is that you suggest, and Natalie will put the information in the chat for people, and then the floor will be yours to start talking emojis.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. It's kind of interesting because Jean's introduction was absolutely accurate about 4 weeks ago. So within the last 4 weeks, I've actually changed jobs. So I'm actually now a judicial officer. I'm actually a court commissioner with the Winnebago County Courts in Winnebago County, Wisconsin. Which has given me, honestly, I have new material for you based off of that different approach now and having a different, seeing things from a different point of view. So it's been an interesting ride so far, and I think it will only help this presentation and help all of you see this from maybe a slightly different point of view as well. My preferred food bank for this presentation is Hope Fridge. Hope Fridge was created actually in California, but then one of my local individuals met the director, and this is actually just a refrigerator that actually sits outside. They build a little shelter around it, but it is a full-size refrigerator that just sits outside. They have one outside of someone's home who donated the space, and they have another one that's actually outside of a grocery store that donated the space. And so it's free to come, free to load. People just drive up with sandwiches that they made and load the fridge, and other people will drive up and take those sandwiches out or whatever happens to be there. So it's a very progressive model of the food bank concept.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you.
Absolutely. All
And
right.
congratulations on your new job.
Thank you. Yes, it's been a learning curve, that's for sure. It's funny though, in that my job with the Winnebago Conflict Resolution Center was just on the 4th floor of this same courthouse. So my office only just moved 3 floors down, but otherwise I'm in the same building. I get a reserved parking spot now, which is kind of nice. So all right, so let's talk about emojis and communication. And I think that emojis and communication are fascinating topics. And I'm going to start out with having you do a little activity. So what I would like you to do is I'm going to split the room in half. And what I want you to do is, if your last name starts with A through M, you're in group 1. If it's N through Z, you're in group 2. So group 1, I'm going to show you a slide. And then, so if you're in group 2, I want you to look away. And then I'll switch it up. In group 2, you'll look at the slide, and then we'll come back as a group. So right now, if you're in group 1, A through M, you can look. If you're N through Z, please look away. Okay. Now, if you're A through M, please look away. And if you're N through Z, I'm going to show you a slide. Okay. So now everybody can look back. I promise you that I showed you the same thing. What was in the middle? I see a 13.
13, it looked like a 13.
B.
I hear a B. So
Mhm.
now somebody's lying. Who's lying? Well, and I promise it's not me, right? It could have been me that it was the one who was lying, but no, I actually did show you the same thing.
Mhm.
I just blocked a few things depending on whether you are group 1 or you were group 2, right? So, but what you really saw in the middle was just this.
Mhm.
And so without any context, is that a B or is that a 13? We don't know. When you just see this by itself, it's really hard to know whether that's a B or if that's a 13. It's the context that actually makes your brain understand what's going on. So it's really hard to look at this slide and see that middle as a B, right? It's nearly impossible. And so I use this to start us off with that concept that we need to realize that context helps us to understand. And context helps us to understand the world that we're seeing, the world that we're hearing, and our communication with other people. By some estimates, there are more than 10 billion phone calls in the world per day. Now, I'm not going to comment on how many of those are robocalls or spam calls or, telling me that the warranty on my car is expired. But I want you to realize that that's a lot of communication that we're doing until you start comparing it to some other numbers. When you compare that to the number of text messages every day of 50 billion, the number of emails every day of 269 billion, the Facebook or WhatsApp messages of 60 billion messages every day, 40 billion Apple iMessages, and there's even 15 billion telegrams. That's an app, not the 1900s. And so This is a lot of communication that we're seeing in the world today, every single day. But what is the difference? The right column is shorter. The right column is written. The right column has a lot of problems. When we go back and we think about, really good communication, a lot of people think of Abraham Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address. I mean, the level of information that he presented, as well as how short it was, how brief it was. They could actually take and, carve in stone the entire speech on the side of a building. There it is, the entire speech. And yet now we're living in a world where instead of giving speeches, these same presidents are tweeting. And so, perhaps this would be what the Gettysburg Address would look like today. So, I use that as a little bit of a joke, but at the same time, I think it's really important to recognize the difference that when you're trying to do 140 characters or less, what that actually leads you to do. This is degrading our communication. This is degrading what we're trying to say. And so here we are living in this age of drastic technological expansion, where every time we turn around, you go and you buy the brand new phone or the brand new computer, and by the time you get it out of the box, it's outdated. And so we're constantly increasing our technology, except for in our communication. We actually have gone backwards. We're actually using 5,000-year-old technology to communicate. People have been communicating and writing for more than 5,000 years. And so we're using this really poor form of communication. And I can prove that it's poor with this simple 5-word sentence. So this sentence, 5 words, could mean 5 different things, depending on which of those words I emphasize. I didn't tell you that. Natalie did. I didn't tell you that. It didn't happen. I didn't tell you that. I might have hinted. I didn't tell you that. I told Jean. I didn't tell you that. I told you something else. So 5 words, but 5 different meanings. And now this is the email that you get from your boss. Or this is the email that you send to your client. Which of those 5 meanings did you mean? Which of those 5 meanings are they going to read? You've got a very poor chance of those lining up. And yet we don't think twice about sending this text message or this email to our clients. And we have to recognize that our clients are receiving these emails from their, their coworkers or their, whoever the other party is in their case. And now this is where, as a mediator, I see a lot of people come in and go, "You're lying. You said I didn't tell you that. And you did tell me that." No, I was meaning that Sally told you, not that I told you. I'm not disagreeing that it was you who was told. I'm just, and it's that which of those 5 did they actually mean to convey versus which of those 5 was actually accepted. So a lot of this goes back to some of the work of Albert Mehrabian out of UCLA. And I know that it's an overused set of data, but I think it's still really powerful to recognize that he looked at communication and its believability. And what he found is 55% comes from our nonverbals. And, so what do I look like? Can you see me? Am I wearing a top hat and tails? That's going to affect whether or not you believe me. If I'm sitting here in a Hawaiian shirt, that might also have an effect on whether or not you believe me, right? So those nonverbals have an effect. Telling you that I'm a court commissioner may have had an effect on whether or not you believe me. right? Those all go to my believability, and they're all nonverbal stuff that I'm not really even telling you, but it's impacting whether or not you believe me. Meridian found 38% comes from our tone of voice. And so I think this is why we really dislike people who have the lilt at the end of their sentence, and everything that they say becomes a question. And we're not really sure if they're saying something or if they're telling us, right? That's really not good communication. It's not a good form of explaining what you're trying to say. It also explains why we don't like people who talk in monotone, because we don't get a read on them, right? We don't understand. We're losing 38% of their message as they talk to us. So that last sliver is only 7%. That's the words. So only 7% of our believability is the words that we're choosing to use. I think this also greatly explains how con artists are actually really effective. I mean, if only 7% is the words, it kind of explains how people can get scammed. But when we think about what we're doing now with sending an email or sending a text message, all we're sending is 7% of our message. We're leaving it to the other person to fill in the rest of those blanks. And so I think this is really an important concept, that when we are sending those messages, when we're sending those emails, we have to realize how much of our message are we actually sending. And then I think it's also important to realize when you do send those LOLs, those acronyms, or the shortened forms of words to other people, you're actually degrading your 7%. So you're actually sending even less of your message. So I think that this is an important thing to remember when you're deciding whether should I just send them an email or should I give them a quick call, right? I think that this plays a big part in that. There's a reason why people used to get on airplanes and fly across the country to do a sales pitch, because it's more than that 7%. There's a reason why when the pandemic started, we all immediately said we need something more than phone calls. At least with a phone call, you get that 38%. But as mediators, we wanted more, right? We wanted more than just that 45% of the message. We wanted some of those nonverbals. And so on a message board at Carnegie Mellon University in the late 70s, someone invented this. Now, it's a really weird thing to say that someone invented the emoticon, because it's just 3 pieces of punctuation put together. And now it's so ubiquitous that we understand it, we know it, we don't even have to explain it. But when he invented it, he actually had to write a user manual. He actually had to explain how to do it. And so I think that this is so powerful, because why did we do this? Why did we immediately start looking for ways to add these emoticons to our messages? I think it's because it adds at least some of that tone of voice back into our message, right? It's not perfect, but it's at least some of that tone of voice is coming back into our message. Now, I know that there are a lot of people who don't like the concept of using emoticons or using emojis in communication. And this brings me to talking about what I have on the screen, which is the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. But let me ask you a question. In non-pandemic times, how many of you are huggers? You like to hug everyone? A couple of hands. Okay. How many of you are anti-huggers? If somebody tried to hug you, you might punch them in the nose, right? A few of you as well. So if you follow purely the golden rule, those huggers should go out and hug everybody. and the anti-huggers should hug nobody. So there's something missing. And so one of my predecessors actually came up with what she thought was one step above gold would be platinum. And so she called it the platinum rule. Instead, she said, do unto others as they want to be done unto. So you hug the huggers, you don't hug the anti-huggers, and nobody gets punched in the nose. I think that this actually needs to become more commonplace in our communication with other people. Instead of talking to myself, I need to be talking to the person who I'm speaking with, right? Communication is a two-way street. It's the sending and it's the receiving. Communication didn't happen just because I spoke. They have to hear me and understand me. And so if I choose to speak in my favorite way of communicating, that may not get through. But if I can communicate with the others as they want to be done unto, now I have a better chance of my communication actually getting through. And so I actually love this concept so much, I refer to it as the ambulance, right? Because on the front of an ambulance, it says the word ambulance, right? But it says it backwards. Why? Because of your rearview mirror, right? Because as they come up behind you, that will be reversed in the mirror. And so they are literally communicating with you the way that you are receiving the message. It would be cheaper for them to buy regular stickers, but they get them special made to say ambulance backwards in order to, I mean, this is life and death communication, literally life and death communication. And they are choosing to communicate with you the way that you're receiving the information. So why aren't we communicating with others the way that they are receiving the information? It makes us more believable. It makes us more persuasive if we communicate with others in their preferred communication style. And so now that brings us to those emojis, right? Emoticons, there were actually something like 300 emoticons that people have developed over the years. I mean, ones for a lot of different emotions, but there were even ones for particular people. There was an emoticon for Santa Claus. And so, you know, those types of things eventually just kind of switched into being this, let's use one character instead of having to use 16 in order to make out that Santa Claus emoticon. Let's just use one Santa Claus emoji and we'll be happy. Now, what's interesting is, you know, we're still not at a level where everybody is using the same emoji keyboard. I know that there are frequently times I will get emails from people, and in that email, it just has random letter J's. I don't know if you've ever seen that, if you've ever noticed the random letter J in your emails from other people. That's actually it's a mistranslation of an emoji. When whatever computer program they were using to write their email to you, they put in an emoji, but that didn't get translated to the computer program that you were reading it with. And most often it's actually the standard smiley face. The standard smiley face actually gets translated as the letter J. And so if you ever see a random letter J in an email, it's probably that they were trying to send you a smiley face. But that, you know, again, this is a mistranslation. And so we're still seeing communication errors based off of our two computers not communicating correctly. And so I think, you know, anytime people develop a new form of communication, we actually go back and see if there's a way to utilize the old form of communication. And so there was actually a gentleman who endeavored to take the entirety of the book, Moby Dick, and translate it from English into emoji. And so the first line of Moby Dick, call me Ishmael, that was how it was actually translated into emoji. So 207,000 words into 93,000 emojis. So, the picture is worth 1,000 words wasn't quite accurate. At least in this translation, it was worth 2.2. But I think I keep using this this example probably because of my sophomoric humor. But the name of the book that he ultimately had, I put it on the slide. It's down at the bottom there. He could have just used an eggplant, but instead he called it Emoji Dick. Okay. I know that's a really inappropriate joke. My apologies, but it's kind of funny to me. All right. So let's talk about whether or not these things are appropriate, right? Are emoticons and emojis in professional settings appropriate? Well, let's go back 60 or so years. The concept of lighting up a cigarette at your desk was absolutely fine. Nobody thought twice of someone lighting up a cigarette at their desk. Also, about that same time, the concept of a woman wearing pants to work was absolutely unheard of, not acceptable, unprofessional. Now, obviously, over those 60 years, the view of those has changed, right? And that's an appropriate change. I use this to highlight that what is professional changes over time. And I think that it will continue to change over time based off of who it is that we're communicating with. And so, when we talk about lawyering, one of the things that I have seen, and this is an older graph, but I've actually done the math since, and this trend continues. I've picked 5 different locations in the state of Wisconsin and actually looked at how much of their caseload is restraining orders. And you can obviously see there's a trend here, and that trend has continued in the recent years. Now, why is this important? Most of these restraining orders, and especially now that I'm sitting on the other side of the bench and actually hearing these restraining orders, most of these restraining orders develop from a lack of communication. It's a lack of communication between the parties that is leading them to filing for restraining orders. And so, most of these restraining orders, not all, but most of these restraining orders are, I don't want to call them silly because that downplays their importance in people's lives. And these are important to people. I also think that sometimes the question is, could you have found another way to work this out? Could you have found another way to work with your neighbor instead of asking for the court to do something like this? Right? Because I have seen those restraining orders where I want my neighbor's dog to stop barking. And, at least under Wisconsin law, if that's what you're asking for, really, the way that you would go about it is to file for a restraining order. And, is this really what they expect that I'm going to do? Is order a dog to stop barking? Another actual case that I did as a mediator was a restraining order case that was filed where the party wanted the judge to stop the wind from blowing. They were not doing anything wrong. They were doing it on their property, and the wind would sometimes blow in such a direction that it would blow into their windows. That's not a restraining order. But it was important to them, and that's what they asked for. And thankfully, our court system has a good relationship with the mediation centers, and so we can utilize mediation in cases like that and do so effectively, very effectively. But I use these as examples of how poor we are becoming at communicating. If I don't have your email address, I'm not going to knock on your door. If I don't have your phone number so I can text you, I'm not going to communicate with you as my neighbor. That's not okay. But that's where we're at as a world right now in our forms of communication. So let's talk more specifically about lawyers and lawyering in a world like this. One thing I will point out is we now have case law. We have emoji case law. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals actually had a case where they had to publish a poop emoji. This is the poop emoji right here on the screen in federal case law. It was important to it was quoting something. It was not actually the judges saying, you know, this is complete poop emoji. This was actually a quote of a Facebook post that they were putting in because it was important to the case. Now, they didn't have to actually decide what the poop emoji meant. That was not part of what the court's decision had to be. But I can tell you that courts do have to decide what those things mean all the time. You know, when someone sends a knife emoji, is that a threat? Is that a threat of harm? You know, that's not necessarily an easy question because it's a picture. It's not necessarily a threat. I'll tell you, just, you know, again, kind of thinking about the communication in a digital world. I just this week actually had a case where someone had submitted to me some text messages as proof of what they were arguing for, and one of the text messages said, you know, have your gorilla pick up our son. Have your gorilla pick up our son. And it was referring to the fiance of the dad. Have your gorilla pick up the son. The attorney for the mom creatively argued to me that it was actually an autocorrect fail. You know, that she was trying to type in the word girlfriend and that somehow autocorrected to gorilla. I was like, you know, there's a lot of similar letters in girlfriend and gorilla. So, but again, you know, why are we having to do this? It's because we're not communicating in a way that's effective. We're communicating in an ineffective way. And so, you know, again, I think that there are absolutely reasons why as attorneys, we need to be aware of, be cognizant of the use of emojis, but I also think we need to use them. And this is where I think that we need to have kind of, I don't know, maybe more of a conversation, but there has been research that has shown that in online negotiations, the use of emoticons and emojis in online negotiations actually leads you to a better result for your client, because it builds rapport with the other party. You know, putting in a, you know, wouldn't it be nice if we could all be outside right now? How are they going to take it? Wouldn't it be nice if we could all be outside right now? Emoji with sunglasses. Yeah, that's kind of cute, right? And so it develops more rapport. And as we all know, developing rapport is extremely important for negotiation. And so, you know, using the emojis effectively is extremely important. If the person that you're negotiating with also knows what emojis mean, right? If I was communicating with one of my judges who literally, when I send him an email, he responds with a phone call. He does not send me emails. He will not. I've known him for 10 years. He has never once sent me an email in 10 years. He just picks up the phone and calls me back when I send him an email. Sending him an emoji is not going to be effective, right? It's just not. But we just had an election and just, you know, we just have 2 new judges who started August 1st. They're both young. I bet sending them an emoji would be totally fine. I know that there's one judge who loves to send messages with the puke emoji. You know, if I'm talking to her, the emojis are probably okay, right? So again, this goes back to that platinum rule: communicate with the person who you're communicating with, not communicate to yourself. But I think, you know, when I send my brother that email that says, "Hey, jerk," right? What is that message? What is it that he's going to get from that? I don't have control. He does. You know, but "Hey, jerk," winky face, right? Now he knows what I mean. Now I've made it more clear. So I want to take a minute to talk about Poe's law. There are a lot of laws of the internet. They're kind of silly, you know, that essentially, you know, one of the laws of the internet says that there is no point at which in an argument online that someone will not bring up Hitler. It will happen in any argument on the internet that eventually someone will bring up Hitler. But Poe's law, I think, is interesting in that it goes beyond the internet. Poe's law says that there is no way to write satire that is so obscure that someone will not believe it. There's no way that you can write satire that is so out of bounds, that is so off the rails, that is so unhinged that someone won't read it and go, you know, you have a point. And this happened in the United States about 10, 12 years ago, when Stephen Colbert, before he was a late night host, he had a comedy show on Comedy Central where he played an extremely right-wing conservative comedian. That's not who Stephen Colbert is. That was the character he was playing on TV. And it was intended to be so extremely right-wing as to be laughable, was the intent. And then the Republican president, actually his staff, but asked Stephen Colbert to come and be the MC at a White House Correspondents' Dinner because they thought he was on their side. And he proceeded to show up and absolutely blast that administration. So despite the fact that he had been doing this for years and was, you know, trying to express how absolutely ridiculous things were, people still believed him as being true. And so I think it's important because I am a very, very, very sarcastic human being. I love sarcasm. I think it's hilarious. Sarcasm doesn't work in written form. And that's really a hard thing to remember. And this is not a new issue. You know, so going back to 1905, people were trying to come up with ways, can I use a different form of punctuation to show that I'm actually trying to make an ironic point, as opposed to making a factual point? Or, you know, there was another one that came out more recently, you know, people trying to come up with punctuation to show this difference. There was actually a push for a while to, you know, we're all aware of regular text and then italics. There was a push for a while to actually create reverse italics to be what you could use for sarcasm. But none of these caught on, but I use them as an expression of, we know that there's a problem here, we just don't have a solution. But I think all of these are really important as things to remember as lawyers, as communicators, as mediators, that people might be trying to be ironic. They might be trying to be sarcastic. They might be trying to say the opposite of what they're saying because that's what they would do if they were in person. There are lots of people who communicate vastly differently in person versus in writing. You may know those people that, you know, you've seen them write a brief to the court and you're like, wow, you're really well spoken. When you take 3 weeks to write a paragraph, you know, but there's those people who are kind of the same, whether that's in person or in writing. And it's those people who we have to be careful of. Are they actually communicating what they actually mean? So all of this is to say, I really think we need to be more cognizant of who we're talking to. Yeah, I'm not recommending that we start throwing emojis into legal briefs. I'm not recommending that we start throwing, you know, emojis out to, you know, the older generations. But when it comes to communicating with, you know, co-counsel, when it comes to communicating with our clients, and there are clients who, you know, the only way that they will be communicated with is by text message. You know, and that raises all sorts of other ethical issues of, do I want my clients to have my personal cell phone number? Do I want my clients to have that type of 24/7 access to me? You know, those types of things I think raises questions. Am I using my phone for personal as well as professional reasons? And then what happens if it gets, you know, lost, or, you know, there's all of those ethical issues that is beyond the scope of today. But when we're talking about who are we communicating with, I think it's really important to think about how do they want to be communicated with. And the newer generations were raised with devices in their hands. They're used to those communications. They're used to texting and, you know, sending short emails. You know, if you, I mean, I jokingly tell my kids, you know, they will never actually answer the door when the doorbell rings, because that's no longer a thing. You now just look on your phone or look on your whatever and see who's at the door. You don't actually answer the door. And so, you know, these things are changing. And notoriously, the legal profession is slow to catch up, in part because the legislatures around the world are typically relatively slow to act to make changes. I mean, for a completely off-topic example, you know, one of the things that we've been dealing with is that we still have a marital presumption in Wisconsin. So if there's a child that was born during the marriage, that it is presumed that the other parent is the father. Well, when you have same-sex marriages, that biologically cannot happen, but we have this presumption that we have to go through like 3 additional hearings to actually get rid of in order to move forward with this divorce. It's silly, but it's what's the law. And so legislatures are slow to respond to those types of things. But my point is, you know, I don't think we're going to see, you know, emojis in court forms anytime soon. But I do think when we're communicating with our clients, when we're communicating with opposing counsel, then it might be absolutely okay. I also, you know, I think about the ambulance, and I it's a little bit ham-handed, and I apologize for that. But truly, if you are ever in a communication with somebody, if you're ever in a conversation and you feel like it's dying, you know, call an ambulance. Try communicating with them the way that they want to be communicated with. And I'll give you my example of this. Fresh out of law school, I'm a snot-nosed young attorney who thought he knew everything. And I had an office in a high rise, and I'm meeting with my client who is a construction company owner. And, he's one of those salt of the earth guys that, his fingernails are black from all the digging and everything that he does every day. And he came into my office and asked me, what do we do about this situation? And I told him what he was doing wrong in his job. And fast forward 3 months, and he comes back in and he asks me the same question. I give him the same answer. Fast forward 3 months, he asks me the same question. I give him the same answer. Fast forward 3 months, he comes in again, and I'm annoyed, honestly. And so I use this as an example of something that I did wrong, but it worked. I actually dropped a 4-letter word on him. I dropped an F-bomb in my conversation with him. I'm like, you are not listening to me, right? What happened when I did that? He actually sat up out of his chair and looked at me. I was communicating like he does on a job site. I was communicating with the person who I was communicating with. And now he actually listened to me. Now we actually had a good conversation. Now he actually made the changes I had been recommending for a year, because I was actually communicating with him, not at him. And I'm not recommending that we drop F-bombs on all of our clients, but I am recommending that we communicate with them. If they are somebody who, loves words, use those, SAT words, and, use those, Latin derivatives. If they are somebody who communicates via text message, communicate via text message. It's going to make you more effective, and it's going to help out your practice in communicating with them. So that is what I had for a slideshow. I would love to open it up for some questions that people might have. So I see in the text here a couple.
Mike, can I ask a question?
Please.
How do you know where to start? Is the communication just in response? So do you let someone else use emojis or different language first, and then you respond in kind? Or do you do the mediator thing and ask the open-ended question that is, how do you prefer communication? What can I do to make this dialogue better and healthier? How do you approach that?
I guess it kind of depends on the circumstances. It's not going to be very effective to go to a judge and say, how do you prefer to be communicated with? That's not going to be effective. With your client, that will. Now, I think there's also a lot of opportunity to be observant and find out things based off of the world that you see. And so I use the examples of, when you walk into somebody's office, you can often get a pretty quick read on their personality. Do they have, humorous pictures up, like the cat hanging from the rope saying, hang in there, okay, they might not take life too seriously. Let's try telling them a joke and being a little bit more playful. Do they have what I like to refer to as the shrine to their loved ones? The 37 pictures of their, husband, their kids, their dog, their neighbor's dog, their, all of those types of things. Now they like that personal connection, that personal touch. And so telling them a story might be effective. If they are someone who has nothing but Post-it notes, this is one of my favorites. If they have like lots and lots of Post-it notes, talk to them in bullet points, because they think in bullet points. That's, if it's too long to fit on a Post-it note, that means that it's too long, right? So it could be shortened. Talk to them in bullet points, because that's going to be more effective. However, all of this is to say that you try it and you see that it isn't working, and so you try a different one. You recognize that you may have to call the ambulance more than once in that communication. And so, let's send an email with one emoji, and it's not going to be the puke emoji. It'll be, let's just send a smiley face at the end of the message and see how that goes over. Do they respond in kind? Yes, cool. No, okay, maybe I won't send one next time. And so there's that give and take that I think you can do, and it's part of that negotiation. And I mean, when you go into like international negotiations, some of the, when they send those advanced teams to do the negotiation prep, they're having a negotiation about what language are we going to negotiate in? What's the seating arrangements going to be? They have the negotiation before the negotiation. I think this falls into that as well. Are we going to use emojis in our negotiation? Are we, it's that dance that you play, and I think that can be very effective.
Yeah, hi. It's amazing to me to think of using emojis in a professional context, because it's definitely a way of communicating. It's like another language, really. I mean, the Moby Dick thing, I still haven't figured out what the boat, well, I mean, I understand why the boat, but exactly how that, that came to mean that sentence. But when you're teaching young lawyers, for example, in your firm, I mean, I guess what you're saying is that this needs to be part of the education on how to communicate in a professional manner still, but using this language of emojis or not using the language of emojis. And a lot of that probably really depends on the type of law firm you're in, or the type of practice you have. I know in the corporate world, it probably would not go over so well, although you may be surprised.
I've seen some of those internal memos within corporations, and they have some pretty flowery language that you wouldn't expect necessarily. And so, it's not as cut and dry as, oh, it's a, Fortune 500 and above don't, Fortune 500 and below do. It's not quite that cut and dry, but I think it kind of is more, if you're talking to partner A, it's okay. If you're talking to partner B, don't do it. And so
Sure.
I think it may not be as clear as, thou shalt not within this organization, but maybe more of individual people differently.
It's interesting how we've evolved from the formal business letter. Even if you were writing to somebody, when you talk to them, you refer to them each other by first names. The letter, you go, dear Mr. So-and-so or dear Ms. So-and-so. You don't say dear Jane or whatever it might be.
Right.
It's formal. Even if you're confirming an extension for whatever, or something, but now, and then evolving to emails, where you still, if it's a formal email, it would still be worded more like a formal letter, but yet it's evolved to being much more casual, and short sentences and all. And then the Twitter, and now these emojis, that's a lot of information to be kept in a legal file. A lot of sources for potential problems too. And bring your own devices and things like that.
Yes, and I think that, we haven't seen, at least I haven't seen, one of the groups I sit on is I sit on the Board of Bar Examiners, the Office of Lawyer Regulation. We have not actually seen much in the way of ethical discipline for lawyers with regards to emojis. Typically it's it's the later messages that they send that get them into trouble. It's not the emojis that get them into trouble. And so, I think you're exactly right that there is a lot of information here that you have to try to remember. Okay, I'm talking to Natalie today, so I need to be funny. I'm talking to Jean today, so I need to be serious. I'm talking to Sarah today, so I have to be, data driven. I have, that's a lot of information. You don't have to do this. This is one of the things I do often get pushback from people is, why do I have to change? You don't. You don't have to change, but people will find you more believable and more persuasive if you communicate to them in the way that they're listening. And as lawyers, it is our job to be believable and persuasive. And so I think that it is helpful to be believable and persuasive. I mean, we've all, if you've done anything in litigation, you've all seen the lawyer who walks into the courtroom and says, first 12 in the box are fine with me, judge, and then proceeds to strike every single person, right? But what they said in front of everybody was very different than how they acted, because there is that believable and persuasive aspect that we're trying to do. And so we have to recognize that that extends beyond the showmanship of the courtroom. And it's also the emails, it's also the text messages, all of those opportunities to communicate with opposing counsel, with the court, with our clients are all opportunities to be believable and be persuasive.
You mentioned Poe's rules for, is that for the internet or for emojis in particular?
Yeah, Poe's law, that one just says that you cannot write satire that is so obscure, so out of bounds that someone will not believe it as truthful. Well,
is there any sort of a book that would be like a dictionary of emojis other than what's, on your phone when you go to choose one?
Yeah, there are a few things out there that you can access. The problem is that, kind of like what I said earlier, with our computer programs not necessarily translating it well, I might use one particular emoji differently than you mean it. So for instance, there's one emoji that I use frequently, and it looks like someone is sweating from their upper lip. And it's a weird emoji, but I use it to go, whew. That's what I mean when I put that emoji into my messages. But is that what you think when you get that emoji? You might think that it's something completely different. And so I think it's important to recognize that what I mean when I send it may not be what you recognize it to be. So there is not, at least at this point, a full and complete dictionary of what these all mean. There are, and I always question whether or not I should bring this up, but there is actually, for a while, there were a couple of celebrities who actually thought and started like spouting that human beings were going to start only writing in emojis, which again, I think is kind of funny that, we're now going back to 4,000-year-old technology and we're going to be writing in hieroglyphs. Right? So like, is that really where we're headed with this? It might not be cuneiform, but now we're writing in hieroglyphs and that's supposed to be better than what we're doing now? I don't know.
Well, as it is said, what's old is new and what's new is old, right? So
that's right.
Here we are. Yeah, well,
I can't see that Roger had his hand up.
Oh, did they? I'm sorry.
Well, thank you, Michael. And I know we're running out of time. I just wanted to comment, going back to your original question, am I communicating in the way that people are going to receive it? Mm-hmm. Not only does that take a lot of wisdom, it takes a lot of humility to do that. And in the end, when you were talking about your experience in court, and I heard a presentation a few years ago from somebody from Ohio about court systems in the Midwest, where they're talking about, let's be more consumer centric. And judges, think of yourselves, those are customers out in the audience, the lawyers and their clients. And so to me, there's a bigger shift that's connected to your critical communication idea that we should be looking at. And so this is just a fantastic presentation. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. I think you have a really interesting point though of, what is, we all say in the judiciary that they're civil servants, but are they actually serving, right? And so I think that question of, are we really looking at ourselves as being customer centric is an important one, and probably the topic for another day.
Thank you so much. On that note, it is the top of the hour, so we must come to a close, but thank you so much. Michael, Mr. Rust, Commissioner Rust. Let's see which way to communicate here, right?
That's right. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you so much. And please, if there's anything that you can donate to a food bank, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much and see you next week. Bye-bye.